doesn't taste like bubblegum.
What does bubblegum taste like?
Like,
Sugar?
have you ever had bazooka gum?
Yeah. I was trying to understand why they called it that.
Bazooka gum.
I drink like a whole bottle of bubblegum.
They used to have like comics on the wrapper.
Put it in the refrigerator and drink it. Bubblegum flavor medicine. That's the worst.
I can't drink it. Like, what it tastes like.
Good Big Red. The drink or the gum?
So bad.
Oh gosh, horrible.
Yeah, I don't know what it tastes like, so I just can't drink
It tastes like red. All right. Good morning, everybody. So some business up front here. Keep your eyes on your Canvas because it's quite possible that those of you who are in the Thursday class, for those of you who are in the Thursday class, we might not have class tomorrow. I would put it at 80 to 90% likely that that's going to happen. If that is the case, I will send out a Canvas message and I'll have a notice posted on the door and everything. If you don't see any Canvas message, then we're going to have class as usual. But I'll make sure that I have that sent out by the end of the day.
You say for tomorrow?
For tomorrow, yes, Carl.
Yes, something against me. Because every time when I perform, you always seem to somehow cancel class every time.
That's exactly why I was going to cancel because I was like, Carl's going to be performing, so I need to cancel class because I have so much against him. No. Also, I have adjusted the schedule slightly through the end of the semester. Hopefully this will be good news for most of you. The homework assignment that you have due on Monday is the final homework assignment for the semester. We will have no more homework assignments. Couple of reasons for that. First of all, we have a lot of material to get through still, but we're going to be doing a lot of in-class stuff. And actually today, we will be doing some in-class assignments, and you will need some manuscript paper. So if you don't have any manuscript paper, here's some. So everybody that's coming up to grab this, make sure that everybody else shames them because these are the people that don't have their required materials today. Just grab one piece. Shame. Shame.
I got mine. I didn't
So remember, you are expected to have manuscript paper with you every day here, even if it's just one piece. That's how you take a lot of notes in this class, is with manuscript paper. It might be a good idea just to get a notebook of it, or all I did was just print these out from blanksheetmusic.net. Just right now, you can even go to the library and print out a few sheets. It's free. Sponsored by blanksheetmusic.net. So what I'm going to do today, here's another reason why I had adjusted the homework schedule. I want to move on past chapter 11 as quickly as possible and get to chapter 12. And we're going to hit chapter 12 today, even though I haven't assigned it as reading. And I'm going to go over a lot of the big points. Chapter 12 is tough to get through, so we're going to spend these last few weeks on 12. And I'm going to be talking about a lot of stuff that is not in the chapter as well. So it's going to be kind of important that you're here and taking notes. And if you're not here, that you're watching the videos online. So before we get to that, does anybody have any questions regarding any sort of counterpoint issues? Chapters 9, 10, 11. Nothing? Okay, so we have that, whatever the homework assignment is that's due Monday. Was that 11.4? 11.4. So again, that's your final homework assignment for the semester. The remaining schedule, let me pull up my calendar. We do not have very many more classes. Next week we have Monday. I'm not officially saying this. I should pause the video. Hold on. And then, so we have Monday next week, and then we have Monday the following the Thanksgiving break. Wednesday of that week, we will not have class because I'm going to be in New Orleans for a conference. However you say it. I've never been there, so it'll be the first time I'll be there. I'm not going to get to enjoy it at all because I'm going to be in meetings the whole time. And then the week after that is the final week of classes, which, why isn't this moving? And we will have class both days that week. There's Monday the 4th of December and Wednesday the 6th. The final exam is the 11th. Normal class time, 9:30. We'll from 9:30 to 10:50. So we're going to spend the remainder of our time here in the 4 remaining class sessions that we have discussing, finishing up 11, hitting chapter 12. We don't go past chapter 12. We only go through 1 through 12 this semester, and then preparing for the final exam. Basically, the final exam is going to cover counterpoint and SATB format. Four-part writing and counterpoint. And that's it. Questions? Comments? Okay, then let's go. I have a whole list of stuff that I need to get through today. So we're going to talk about four-part writing today. Even though we're going to be writing in 4 parts, we use a lot of the techniques and methods that we learned in counterpoint. So there's a few different terms for 4-part writing. There's SATB, which stands for soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Chorale style. 4-part. All of these are the same thing. In SATB format, it's not always necessarily going to be for 4-part choir. These are terms that we use for the different ranges. Soprano is the high range, alto is the mid-high range, tenor is the mid-low, bass is the low. In 4-part or SATB format, I sort of use these terms all interchangeably. I think your book uses SATB. We always use the grand staff, and make sure that when you're writing a grand staff, that you connect them with a line and a brace or a bracket over here. If you don't do that, this is saying that you have one line of treble followed by another line of bass. So it would be incorrectly written that way. Make sure you always have your brace over here. And then when you write key signatures, it goes on both staves. So let's say, for example, B flat major. You'd have that for both. And then the way that we distinguish the voices from each other is with stems. So I'm going to write a tonic chord in root position here with sort of a standard voicing. And that's the way that we can differentiate the voices from each other. The stems look like they're going the wrong direction, but they're not. The bass stem always points down regardless of where it is in the staff. So if you have a bass note that's up here, it's still going to have a downward facing stem. And then tenor has an upward facing stem, alto's down, soprano is up. And it's always going to be, that's always going to be the case. And they always need to be in this order. You'll never have the soprano go lower than the alto. There's never a reason for that to happen. You'll never have them cross. You never should have them crossing each other. All right, so let's talk doublings. I'm going to leave some space over here because I want to leave this on the board. So SATB doubling rules. Your book has a set of doubling rules that are sort of simple, somewhat elementary. We'll go over those first and then I'll expand upon those. Let's see, the doubling rules are it's at the top of one of these left pages. To page 240, there's 5 key concepts for doubling. And I'm going to disagree with the very first sentence that is in your book here. It says, never double a note with an accidental or a tendency tone. I agree with the tendency tone, but not the accidental, because that will not always be the case. It says a scale degree or chord member that must be resolved, such as the leading tone. I will agree with never double the leading tone, and that's always going to be the case. Always, always. It's never going to change to not double the leading tone. So in root position, usually the bass or root is doubled, which is true. Double the root, which is the bass. And notice that I've done that here in this B flat major chord. We have two B flats, and then here's the fifth, and here's the third. The notes above the bass can appear in any order. Like for example, I could revoice this chord like this. That's the same chord, just with a different voicing. Same doubling, except I put the doubled note up here, fifth, third, root. We can do it this way as well. A lot of different ways to voice the same chord. Those are all same chord, different voicings. Now I'm going to expand upon what your book says for first inversion. Here's what your book says on page 240. And by the way, let me make this official. Read. What tune is that? I heard somebody. Read chapter 12 by Monday. Give yourself some time with it, because there's a lot of stuff to get through. The things that you might have to read 3 or 4 times in chapter 12. But on page 240, number 3 from Doubling Guidelines for Triads. For first inversion, you can double any chord member that does not have an added accidental and is not a tendency tone. Doubling the soprano is one common strategy for major or minor triads. Doubling the bass is another. Let's start with that. First inversion. Any chord member may be doubled. However, there is a hierarchy of doubling placements. I'll put an asterisk and put that over here. So you can double the root, you can double the third, you can double the fifth. It doesn't matter in a first inversion triad. What matters is where the doubling occurs within the voicings. So your book says that doubling the soprano is one common strategy, doubling the bass is another. I've mentioned this in a previous lecture, but now we're going to talk about it in a little bit greater detail. The Savoy method. Savoy stands for soprano, bass, outer, inner. And this is in order of doubling priority, best to worst. Your best possible situation is doubling the soprano with an inner voice. Doubling it with alto or tenor. Just using some common sense and logic, which would you figure is better? To double the soprano with the alto or to double it with the tenor? Why is that the case? I totally agree.
Because you talk about what you don't have voices to be together.
Yeah, if you double it in the alto, you either have a unison or an octave. Unison is really close, so you're going to have to watch out for the voicing of the next chord. An octave is as far as those two voices can get from each other, so you also have to worry about it. However, it's still a strong sonority, a strong sound quality. So the best possible doubling is soprano tenor, followed by soprano alto. Still doubling the soprano and the alto is better than doubling the bass with anything, as far as the strength of the chord. Then doubling the bass is doubling it with an inner voice, either alto or tenor. So that means bass with alto or tenor. And you only double the bass if you cannot double the soprano.
So, in that case, would it be better to double the alto than the tenor?
Not necessarily, because the bass is under a different set of rules than all the others. There's no such thing as a spacing error with the bass, and we'll talk about that later. No, there's no hierarchy within the bass category there. And then outer is pretty straightforward. Outer voices, that's the soprano and bass. And then inner voices, alto, tenor. I will go as far as to say you nearly never do this. Doubling the inner voices is a very, very weak voicing. So it should only be used as a last resort. There are some situations where you will do it. But if you are doubling in your inner voices, better make sure that you've ruled everything else out. So first inversion triads are actually pretty easy compared to root position because you can double anything, but you do have to worry about this. For this semester and next semester, I will be watching your part writing very carefully for this and making sure that your thought process is SBOI, S-B-O-I, when thinking of first inversions. The first thing that should go into your brain when you see a first inversion triad is SBOI. Go through your steps. Soprano, try to double the soprano, then the bass, then outer, and inner. Does that make sense? It's pretty easy. You just need to remember it. And then second inversion. So I'm going to leave some space for this because second inversion triads are different than pretty much all other chords. And it's because of the fourth that occurs in it. The other chords don't have any fourths. There's sixths, fifths, thirds, but no fourths. In the second inversion triad, the bass position, or the figured bass, is 6/4 because there is a fourth in there. Second inversion triads are non-functional. So what that means is they cannot substitute for root position or first inversion triads. First inversion and root position can be swapped back and forth pretty much at will. Keeping in mind that first inversion is slightly weaker than root position, which for some instances is not a bad thing, is actually a good thing. Like if you're writing a cadence, you want it to be strong, use root position. But if you have a dominant and a tonic chord that are not part of a cadence, sometimes putting them in a first inversion setup will lessen the impact of those chords. However, second inversion triads cannot substitute for root position or first inversion. This is really, 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 really important to remember. You can't just throw first inversion triads around anywhere that you want. There's specific types of them. And what this means, that they're non-functional, this chord is not a tonic chord. In different situations, believe it or not, that can be a dominant chord, even though it looks like it's a tonic chord. And it has to do with these intervals. When you put that 6/4 on there, it really changes everything. And I can prove it by playing them. Here's a C major chord in root position. Okay, let me play it over here. Root position, first inversion, and then second inversion has an instability to it. Listen to this chord followed by another chord. That sounds like the logical next chord after this. And that's because of the instability created by that interval. Root position there. So, moral of the story is 6/4 chords cannot freely substitute for root position or first inversion. The fifth should always be doubled, which is the base. So really, basically, it has the same doubling rules as the doubling rule as root position. You're doubling the base. It just happens to be the fifth. So let's take this tonic chord and set it up in some different setups. We'll do it in first inversion and then second inversion. So it's B flat major. If it's in first inversion, we'll have a D in the bass. And we can double the D, we can double the B flat, we can double the F. Doesn't really matter. So I will, I'll put a B flat in the soprano, and I'll double it in the tenor, which leaves us with the F remaining. And that's a very strong first inversion doubling, because I have the soprano doubled with the tenor. The alto doubling would be like this. Yeah, which is also strong. If I revoice this and double the bass, be something like this. There's a bass doubling. Which voice is the bass doubled with in that first chord? The alto. So the D, there's a D in the bass, and the D is doubled here in the alto. So that's either of the inner voices is fine with the bass to be doubled. And then for a 6/4 chord, you have the fifth in the bass. So you need another fifth somewhere. I'll just put it there. And then I have a B flat and a D remaining. There's an example of a voicing for a 6/4 chord. All right, so that just is regarding the doublings for these. It has nothing to do with how the chords move, any of the voice leading errors or anything like that. Let's talk about some voice leading errors. A lot of similar errors to counterpoint. We do have to worry about direct fifths and direct octaves or hidden fifths, hidden octaves. That's also in your chapter 12. We already know about those. Let's see if I can do an example of this. Sometimes it's hard to just come up with an error. Try. That works. We have a tonic to a dominant with a direct octave. You see it? We have a leap in the soprano, or skip or leap, as long as it's more than a step. Actually, let's put that, because your book uses this terminology. If we have more than a step here, we then look for similar motion between the bass and the soprano, which we do have, and the resulting interval is a perfect octave. That's a hidden octave, and it's bad. We have to worry about parallels, but because we have four voices, we have a lot of potential parallels. Parallel fifths, parallel octaves exist between any two voices. So you have to check for parallel fifths between bass and tenor, bass and alto, bass and soprano, tenor and alto, tenor and soprano, alto and soprano. All of those could potentially have forbidden parallels. Moral of the story is try to use as little parallel motion as possible. Same as with counterpoint. The more contrary motion that you have, usually the better. And then let's see, spacings. Chord spacings. Consecutive voices should be no more than an octave apart from each other. Let's write it. No more than an octave. An octave is fine. The only exception is the bass. Bass is excluded from this. So one of the setups that I showed you for this tonic chord shows an example of that. It's a root position tonic. I have more than an octave between the bass and the tenor, which is completely fine. The bass can be as far away from the tenor as it needs to be. What we have to watch out for is here to here. Where this will be the biggest problem is in the inner voices. Sometimes it's hard to see this when it's happening in the inner voices. For example, there's a big fat spacing error in that chord. Actually, a huge spacing error. If we look up an octave from this note, it would be here. So this is significantly more than an octave. In the way that I grade, I'll display spacing errors with a bracket like that. So that would be considered an error. It weakens the chord if you have too much space between those. What was that? Okay. Yes, that is an error. What? I'm confused. Oh, okay, error. Error. That's what the word that should not exist. It's like rural. I had an orchestra director go off for about 10 minutes once in a rehearsal about the word rural. And he's one of my favorite teachers that I've ever had. He's from Mexico and has somewhat of an accent that has a really low voice and is very commanding. And he just stopped rehearsal once. He's like, "Why does the word rural?" It said rural, and he did that for like 5 minutes, and we're all sitting here with our instruments. rural, error, rural. Maybe we should just get rid of the letter R.
Why did you bracket it?
Because this is a spacing error. The reason it's a spacing error is that there's more than one octave between these. If I revoice this, let's say that I turn this into a first inversion. I do this. This is not a spacing error. You can have an octave between, you just can't have more than an octave. However, this is a very weak voicing, so there's probably an issue here because I doubled the inner voices. So what you can do, you can share the same pitch between two voices and you can get all the way up to an octave. So it is possible for two voices to be in the same place, as long as it's only for one chord. Then they have to move away from each other after that. And that leads me to another error. Error is voice crossing and voice overlap. What I believe your book does not cover voice overlap, but it's something to avoid, and it's actually neglected in a lot of theory texts. It's not in the other book that I used to use either. Voice crossing is. Voice crossing is really easy to avoid. Here's an example of it. It's pretty obvious when it happens. Like that. That just, in the words of an old colleague of mine who gave a seminar on auditioning, he was talking about videotaping yourself to make sure that you look right when you're playing, because in his words, it says, if you look jacked up, you are jacked up. That looks jacked up, because it is. That's voice crossing. Voice overlap is harder to spot. Let's see here. I'm just going to show a cross section here. So here's an example of voice overlap. Once you've set up a chord with a voicing, you've created a set of boundaries, imaginary boundaries. Here and here. The soprano has crossed over the boundary that was presented by the alto in this chord, which is an error. It's not an enormous error, but it does contribute to weak voice leading, which is why it should be avoided, and I will always grade against this. So you do have to watch out for it. This is called voice overlap. This is my term, by the way. It's not a universal term. This is the note that's overlapping, and that's the problem. It can go to the border, it just can't go past the border. So here's an example of something that is okay. That would be fine. It just can't go past. Does that make sense? That is, it's easy to avoid as long as you're giving voices individual space. If you're not leaping all over the place, then it's pretty easy to avoid. All right, so now that leads me to the general rule that you should follow when voice leading. You guys know what that stands for? Keep it simple, smarty pants. Because I don't want to use that word. Keep it simple, students.
Oh.
That's even better. I just came up with that one. And this is the general rule that should be followed when voice leading 4-part style. Keep it as simple as possible. If possible, keep common tones in the same voice, the consecutive chords. So if you're going from a C major chord to an F major chord, C is a common tone between those two. There's C, E, G, and F, A, C. If the alto has a C, try to continue the C in the next chord, if it's possible. It's not always possible. When it's not possible, or if there are no common tones, move the smallest distance possible. We have all these chapters on voice leading errors, which almost all can be avoided by doing this. So you keep your common tones common, and then move the smallest distance possible. I'll tell a quick story because I just thought of this. Last week I was playing in this show. The Downtown Event Center is trying to. What note is that? You get an F if you don't know what note it is. Make sure the phones are off. I don't know what it is. So. Anybody have perfect pitch? Hey, I was right. It was E. Hey, I have perfect pitch now. So the Downtown Event Center is trying to create an orchestra called the Symphonic Rock Orchestra. Any of you know Lon Bronson? Hear the name Lon Bronson?
I know the name.
Okay, good. I was surprised that my other class didn't know the name. He's a huge figure in the rock community here in Las Vegas. Really, really big figure. He has a group that performs regularly, actually in a lot of different venues, but super talented guy. And he was the leader of this group. And I had no idea what the show was for until we actually did the show, but he had all these arrangements. We played a lot of rock standards like Enter Sandman, Dream On, and stuff like that. And it was with a rock band and strings and brass as well. I don't think there were any. There were a couple of woodwinds, but we had a rehearsal, and I noticed the guitar player kept looking over at me funny, and we were all the way across the stage from each other, and kept like making eye contact with me. I'm like, what's this guy doing? And then at the dress rehearsal, he comes up to me and he says, "Mr. Harvey," and then I was like, "What is?" And then he does the thing that I hate. He goes, "You don't remember me, do you? Don't ever do that to anybody, because it never goes well for the person." And I was like, "Sorry." And then after he started to talk about it, it came back to my memory. A couple of years ago, he came to meet with me here because he wanted to do the music program here, and he didn't have time to come to class. So he said, "Is there anything that I can do to learn this stuff outside of class?" And I gave him a few references, and I gave him a link to the videos that I use for my Music 102 class. And he came up and he was just raving about these videos. And I do a whole thing in, I think it's for that. I don't know if it's for that class or if it's for another, but I do a whole video on the Keep It Simple thing. And he came up and he's like, "Blowing my mind with this man. All these tricks for learning this stuff. Do you want me to give you money for it?" And I should have gone yes, but it was just cool because he's this killer guitar player that was on this gig, and I hadn't recognized him until then, so I felt badly about that. But it's stuff like this that will save you a lot of time if you could simplify things as much as possible. Yes, there are all these rules that we need to learn. Learn from our textbook, but ultimately, this is just about the only thing that you ever have to worry about. And you'll be so surprised at how often you won't do this. Please always keep it as simple as possible. With experience, you can look at a part writing assignment and within a half of a second know if it's right or it's wrong, just by the way it looks. There's a simple look and then there's a non-simple look. One that doesn't look simple, it has leaps all over the place. The motion is weird. So if you keep it as simple as possible, there's a certain look to it. And we are going to do a little bit of part writing today, which is why I'm having you all have manuscript paper, which you all should have anyway. So let's do some examples of keeping it simple, students. I'm going to change it to students now. It's not Start Smarty Pants anymore. I'm going to leave our doubling rules up there. Oh, wait, actually, there's one more thing I want to go over before we do this. General functions. So hopefully you all know your specific functions now. Tonic, supertonic, median, subdominant, dominant, submedian, leading tone. All in order. That if you don't know those, you should, because that's how I refer to the chords. And you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. I never talk about 3 chords, 4 chords, 5 chords, because there's no such thing. No such things. But those are specific functions. Those are functions that are specific chords. There are general functions as well. Think about your biology class. The specific functions are the species. Wow. The general functions are the genus. Is that what it's called? The genus? Genus? Yeah, it's whatever happens that's a little bit less specific than species. So there are 4 general functions. There's the tonic function. There's the dominant function. There's the predominant function. And there's the preparatory function. So these are the general functions on this side. And then specific functions. I didn't do this very well. We'll put specific over here. So there's only one specific function that performs the general tonic function, and that's the tonic chord. What that means is that there's nothing else that does the tonic's job. The job of tonic is to serve as home base, and there's no other home base than tonic. The dominant function, of course, the specific dominant function, as well as leading tone. Anything that contains a leading tone. And this gets a little bit confusing because there's another chord other than those 2 which do contain the 7th scale degree. Other than dominant and leading tone, what else contains that seventh scale degree as far as triads go? So I'm asking, other than dominant and leading tone, what other triad contains the seventh scale degree?
The third.
What's the name of that function?
Median.
Mediant. The mediant does not contain a leading tone. Even though it looks like it does not contain a leading tone, because the concept of leading tone is a seventh scale degree that is a tendency tone to lead to one, and it does not perform the leading tone function in a mediant chord. So these are the only two chords that do contain leading tones, and it's the leading tone that leads to tonic, and it's dominant's job to lead to tonic. It gets us back home. You can go through all sorts of chords. And then as soon as I hit a dominant chord, it prepares us for tonic. It gets us back home. And then predominant, you might figure, is what happens before dominant. Those are the two predominant chords, subdominant and supertonic. And they're usually what prepare us for the dominant chords. And actually, we won't see anything other than these before a dominant chord, or I guess tonic could happen as well. And then preparatory prepare us for predominant. And that's what's remaining. We have submediant and median. And that's basically how these functions work. There are specific pathways from chord to chord, but generally this is how they work. Mm-hmm.
This is just for like my personal knowledge.
Okay.
Where does a subtonic fit in?
Subtonic would be a preparatory chord.
Okay, preparatory.
Yeah, since I put functions in major, there would be no subtonic, but if we were in minor, the subtonic would be here.
Okay.
And it would be the last preparatory chord. It's
the weakest.
what's that? It's the weakest. It needs the most chords to get back to tonic. And a few weeks ago, I put up the chart on the board of the harmonic functions. I'm not going to do that today. We'll spend plenty of time with that in the future. But basically, this is what tonal music is that we have our tonics and our dominants. Sometimes these are used to refer to them. I think our book even does this. For the general functions, we use T and D. And then I don't know yet what your book calls preparatory chords. This is not a universal term. There's a lot of different terms for this. But sometimes predominance is done with a PD. And maybe we'll say preparatory is P. So a really common setup for a phrase would be tonic, preparatory, predominant, dominant, tonic. So for example, here's tonic. If I pick one of those predominant chords, how about the submediant chord? And then I go to one of the predominant chords. How about supertonic? And then dominant, tonic. Like that. And it creates a pretty simple, understandable phrase. All right, we'll spend tons of time with it. So I'm going to erase this, and we're going to voice lead a standard chord progression. I'm not going to worry about rhythm. I'll just write them all as half notes. I'm going to voice that chord progression. I'm going to analyze underneath here the general functions. So all the tonics are here. I'm going to leave that one for last. What general function does a mediant chord perform? You guys remember? That was at the bottom of the list. It was the preparatory function. The median chord is a little bit of a dangerous chord. It's a great chord, but it's dangerous because you have a lot of work to do once you've written the median chord. And then subdominant is a predominant chord. So is supertonic. And then dominant is dominant. And then remember, 6/4 chords are non-functional. And this will be explained in greater detail or in detail in a later class. This is actually a dominant chord. And in some texts, actually your text analyzes this chord in the way that I prefer over the book that I used to use, but we haven't gotten there yet, so I'll save it for that. It's a little bit of a confusing chord, and when we talk about it, I'll tell the story about how I almost got into a fist fight with a guy about that chord. I'm not kidding.
So why is it dominant and not predominant?
Because it performs a dominant function.
Okay. So
This, to try to simplify it, I don't want to go too far down that road. This is all one chord.
oh, I see.
So that even though it looks like two chords, it's actually one chord. It's doing one thing. Good question though, because it does happen before the dominant, but it's actually performing a dominant function. In every way, that chord is dominant, other than its spelling, which is sort of strange.
So it's like the British word of spelling color.
Colour. Yeah, those Brits, they're so quirky. So let's write some minims, crotchets, and quavers here. Baseline. Baseline, we don't have much choice over. I'm going to start here, although I could start in any other place. There is a nice little chart in your chapter 12 of the ranges for these. Oh, hey. Your book does cover voice overlap, good. And it uses the same term that I use. Page 237 shows the typical SATB ranges. I will hold you to these. The range of the bass is the E below the staff. You're safe with anything that's within the staff. All right, so we have B. I'm just going to write the bass line first. So this is a median chord. It's going to have a third scale degree as our bass. It's in root position. Subdominant's going to have an E flat in the bass. What's the bass note going to be of a supertonic 6 in B flat major? Yeah, it's going to be the same as the subdominant. And then what about the bass note of a tonic 6/4?
G.
Mm,
Oh,
yeah, you're close.
I was thinking C.
F. And then also F for this one, and then back to B flat. We could go up to a B flat or down to a B flat. I'll go down. It'll give me more room. So here's our bass line. And even with it being out of tune, you can sort of hear the cohesion of that, how it does create a phrase. And then usually a good next step is to write a soprano line and think about your counterpoint somewhat when doing this. It needs to be, the soprano and bass usually work like a one-to-one counterpoint. So we'll start this. It's not exact, but we'll use a lot of the techniques that we used in chapters 9 through 11. So this is a D minor chord. If we go down to an A, that creates nice contrary motion, and we had a skip here anyway, and we can write a stepwise here, because we wouldn't write two skips usually. We're going to an E flat major. We cannot do this, because that would be parallel fifths between those voices, fifth, fifth. But we could do contrary motion by step.
Wait. Is that a 7 in the second chord?
No, this is a D minor chord, D, F, A. That's the A. So the root fifth there.
I was thinking
And then this is a C minor chord, C, E flat, G. Keep it simple, students. If you can keep common tones common, then do so. This is a little bit different than in counterpoint. When you only have two voices, you want them to move as much as possible. We'll have motion in the other voices. So if you can keep the voices the same, that's a good thing. And then here, tonic 6/4. This is a B flat major. We're going to need to have two Fs, and this provides nice contrary motion as well. It's a little close together, but we'll have some room. We'll learn more about, actually, just hold on, not that. Let's leave that as an F. I just got ahead of myself. We'll learn more about how to voice this. This structure, the tonic 6/4 followed by a dominant, is something called a cadential 6/4. And there's a really specific way to voice it. As long as we're following the keep it simple method, we'll do the right thing anyway. And then what do you think about the bass or the soprano line here? So let's do this. Well, I forgot to mention something, so we won't do that. What do you think? What's going to work best? Go back to the B flat.
Yes.
We could do that. It's a leap, but it's not a bad thing. It's still just a fourth. That's going to be a nice strong motion, and it's going to be something called a PAC, which we did talk about, and I will come back and talk about that in a second because I'm going to have you all write a PAC today. I need to get moving on this so I can have you all do your thing. So now we have an outer voice structure. Look at that beautiful contrary motion that we have all the way through too. So we have this. That exact contrary motion. Now we fill in the inner voices, keeping doubling rules in mind. Root position, double the root. Done. Already done. So what we have left is a D and an F. Two ways that we could do it. Here's one. That's fine, and that's within the confines of our ranges. Here's another way. I usually prefer this voicing because of how much space that gives us, but considering how close the bass is getting over here, I'm going to start with the other voicing, because that's going to give me more room with which to work in these other voices. And when you're doing these, make sure you have a big eraser with you and that you're not writing hard, because you're going to end up doing a lot of erasing. And I guarantee at some point it's going to happen where you write 4 or 5 chords in, and then you realize you're going to have to erase all of what you did because it doesn't work, what you ended up doing. It's just sort of the way that this part writing stuff works. D, F, A, we need another D. Keep it simple. We had a D. If we can keep it there, let's do it. And then F is common. We kept that as simple as possible. And that's a great way to voice that chord. Moved as little as possible. And nice contrary motion between the moving voices. And then here we're going to an E flat major. There are no common tones between D minor and E flat major, so we can't keep them common. So what we want to do is move as little as possible. We have an E flat, we have a G. We need another E flat because it's in root position, and we need a B flat. So here would be our option to go to the E flat, which is only moving by step. To go to B flat there, we would have voice overlap, because it would overlap where the tenor is. So we have no choice about that, considering how we voiced this chord. And that allows for the tenor to move just a third. And that works out great. These two chords, E flat major and C minor, have two common tones, E flat and G. So if we can keep them common, we should. Be like that. And then what should we double in that chord? It's a first inversion. We can double anything we want. What we need to worry about is SVOI, soprano bass outer inner. So what's going to be the strongest doubling here? G in the tenor would be the strongest doubling. I see a little bit of a red flag because of how close we're getting here, but I knew that was going to happen because how close we put our outer voices here. Let's just see if we can get around that, and I think we can. This is going to be a B flat major. We need a doubled F. We have the doubled F, so we need a B flat and we need a D. The only way that we can do it is like this. Everything else would create overlap or voice crossing. This is going to a dominant chord, which is F major. We need two Fs. We have an A and a C remaining. Put them there. Kept it as simple as possible. Just moved down a step in two voices. And now we have a lot of room here. We have two B flats, which we need. And then we need an F and a D. That's one solution, and that's actually the simplest solution. We could have also used this voicing that we did for the first chord. But the reason I didn't pick that one is that we would have too big of a, or we'd have a leap of a fourth. And it's not overlap if you're sharing the same note.
Okay.
It's only overlap when you're going over it. So this can be an F, it just can't go below an F. And voice overlap only exists in consecutive chords. So it's not like once I've done this chord, nothing can cross the B flat throughout the rest of the example.
I just meant with
Right.
the soprano and alto.
In the last two chords?
Yeah.
Hmm.
If you would have put the F there.
No, because that would be the same pitch. Yeah, so, and it'd be the same thing. Looks like what's happening here. Same pitch is fine, just can't go over. All right, I can play this on this because I won't have to hit my sticky key. So we have, here's our tonic chord. That's it up, and then we move to our mediant. Nice chord, and then subdominant. Here's our supertonic 6. And I notice an error in that one that we'll come back to in a second as I hear it. And there's our tonic 6/4. And finish it off with this. So what error do we have in that supertonic 6 chord? Didn't even identify it until I heard it. Kind of a big error. Yeah, there's not a root in that chord. We have two doublings. I didn't even notice that we had already doubled. So instead of this, we would have to put the C, which would give us the bass doubling. If we tried, if we could also put the C in the alto, which would be this. So this is one potential solution. And then there's also this. And that would give us our nice soprano tenor doubling. Both are fine. Both are completely appropriate. Jonathan said way too much. Oh, you move up. I thought you leave. It's like, oh, I reached the point where it's over. All right, now I'm going to give you all a chord progression that I want you to voice lead in 4 parts. But I'm going to explain one thing before we do this. Because I'm going to want you to write a PAC at the end of this, and let's review what a PAC is. Yes. Can anybody tell me what an authentic cadence is, the A part of this? Yeah, authentic just means dominant tonic. Perfect is dominant to tonic specifically, not just general functions, but the specific functions in root position with the first scale degree in the soprano of that chord. That's what makes it perfect. All right, so on a sheet of staff paper, in C major, I want you to voice this progression in 4 parts. And I'm going to check everybody's work, so everybody's going to be doing it today. You can't leave until you've done this today. I have the security out there, and they're not. And I told them they can't leave. until they've worked on this.
So we have to turn in our manuscript paper.
Now I'm going to come over, and once you're done, just raise your hand and I'll come check on it. If you get it right quickly, then you can leave early. There's your progression. 6 chords. You have a little bit of everything in there. And it's in C major, 4 parts. Write them all as half notes. Don't even put a time signature. Let's just make them all half notes. If you have any questions, let me know. We're just going to do this exactly the same way as we just did that last progression. Remember, keep it as simple as possible. Simple usually means right. As you're working on this, if you want to check to make sure you're on the right track, just raise your hand and I'll come over and take a look. So you have no bit. Sorry to interrupt everybody's thought. Remember also the general ranges that you want soprano, alto, tenor, and bass to sort of have their own space. The soprano tends to be towards the top of this treble clef, alto towards the bottom, tenor top, bass bottom. So especially when you start with your first chord, you should try to give yourself the most room possible. to make it easier, you might want to smooth it out a little bit, as much stepwise as you can. All you guys need to know. Let's see. So the if you try to keep your chromosomes common, C exists in this cord, so you just move it over. That makes the rest of the cord a little easier. As you're doing this, when you're thinking melodically, like left to right, the motion should be as smooth as possible. When possible, keep the notes the same, or just move them by step. That's going to make it the easiest for you. That's fine. A way that you could solve that is just drop those both an octave, because that's still in range. Yeah. This isn't a bad doubling, but it's the bass doubling. You probably could double the soprano. Yeah, those guys work. Yep. Good. Let's see, so if you G and A, I think you meant A there. And a warning sign right away that is how much parallel motion you have here. So there's probably something like right here we have direct hit. Because there's a G here, there's some motion. So if you can avoid parallel motion, especially between voices like that, otherwise it's you don't have to double it in the soprano. You can not do it somewhere else. Remember stems are on the left side. It should look like the lowercase letter. No, now you have you have a big leap there. It's the way that you got into it and out of it is fine, but you can probably avoid it here. That should be it. It's an F.
Right here?
Yeah.
Oh, I put the dash there because I was playing.
Good. You wrote an F.
I didn't put.
That is beyond the line.
Oh, oh. I'm not good at the things.
Good contrary motion, nice and smooth. All right, I'm just going to sort of make a lap and look at everybody's whole. So Thomas is first. Incorrect deadline here. It's also not a PAC. You can fix that by making it a PAC.
Let's fix this. I'm determined now. Yes.
All right, so you're kind of mapping your way around with those.
Figure out where.
So baseline, we need to work over here. Base first, this chord is going to be a C bass, and you have E. first thing that jumps out at me, and this is how much emotion there is here. There's a lot of leaves. All right, oh man, but that's usually going to be a bridging ground for voice problems. So for this to be a PAC, you need to have a C in the soprano. You fix the spelling, but it's not the PAC, but everything else is the same. Well, first of all, we fix the bass line. So the bass note for this chorus should be an A. And then also the bass is not correct for this song. The rest of it's good.
That's right. And it did not.
So you have to have the bass for the song. You have parallel fifths, though, the tenor and the soprano. Those two chords, the common tone between this is A. So if you can keep the A common, that's right. You have an A in the alto, you can keep it there. Make it life easier. Well, since this is submedian here, you have 6th scale degree, and the bass is A.
Thank you.
And F is correct. All right, so make sure your stems for the bass are pointing down.
Oh,
All right. Bass note, double check on this one.
okay.
Is this?
Yeah, that looks good. Cool. Got it.
Oh.
You were.
Figure three.
Yeah, there you go. Good.
Yes.
Got it.
So, repeatable. This is
No, it's fine in 4-part writing. It's fine. It's as little motion as possible, even if it's the same for consecutive chords. No, it doesn't need to be rearticulated.
Yes.
If you can try to aim for a little bit of a smoother soprano line, it'll make things easier. It should be primarily stepwise. This is the bass note's not correct. Because it's in first inversion, you gotta set up like this root position.
Value the
Okay,
term
this
in
looks a
phonetic.
lot better, right, versus height. Only little picky thing is that the voicing is a little complicated from year to year. We'll go over this in another class, but typically, with some common tone, it stays the same, which is the key in this division. You'll have 2 notes that stay the same.
I thought you were talking about this one, I was like,
That's fine. We left two common tones that stay the same and 2 that go down by itself.
I meant to put that as a G. I'm suffering from lack of sleep right now. I meant to put that as a G. I've already told you that right now. Ooh, I need some sleep. Yeah, because I didn't have my doubles, so I made up my own note.
Second version.
At first sight, I see a lot of leaves here, it's all leaves. Yeah, so you can start by having a nice soprano. All right, we're almost out of time, so let me just mention a couple of things. We're going to be doing a lot of writing assignments over the next few weeks. Start off by making sure that your voices are as smooth as possible. If you can keep it in the same spot, do that. If you can make it by step, do that. The last resort should be to go more than a step. And for a lot of you, I saw you first just trying to spell the chords, which I get that, but you need to make sure that you're aiming for smooth lines. That will make your life a lot easier, I promise. It will. So I think we're just about out of time. If you want me to check anything else, let me know. Otherwise, we are done for the day. We are. If you guys want to keep working on it, so we still have 2 minutes left.
That movie so fast.
If any of you want me to check your work, let me know.
I actually had a question about the finance in for Thursday class. It does say like 15 out of 300, which I.
Yes, that's the extra credit
Okay,
that I
they're not
dealt
on
out.
campus.
Right, it's not on campus.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I was like,
it's not there.
whoa,
No,
okay,
that's
so
not
it's
your
not-
grade. That's the extra
Okay.
points. Yeah.
Did you pass that out on Thursday?
I did not.
Okay. I was freaking out. Wait, I suck.
No, it's fine.
I have actually a procedure if you want.
You do? I think it was like.
I'm gonna go.
See ya. So the base note is going to be an F for that chord
And this one was way.
because it's in first inversion. It's a D minor chord with an F in the base. Yeah.
Have a good day.
You too. Thanks.